Welcome to Kepler Conversations. I'm Dr. Scott Postma. Kepler is an online marketplace for classical Christian education. We employ the historic university model and leverage the best available technology so that we can empower families by liberating teachers so they can make classical liberal arts education available, accessible, and affordable. Well, today I'm joined by Kepler teacher Annie Nardone. Annie is a C.S. Lewis Institute Fellow with a Master of Arts degree in Cultural Apologetics from Houston Christian University. Her authorship includes contributing and editing to the Apologetic Quarterly, an unexpected journal, the online magazine Cultivating from Cultivating Oaks Press, the Anselm Society, and several poetry anthologies, including Calla Press and Poetica. Additionally, she writes book reviews with a focus on the enduring beauty and truth found in literature and the arts, and a monthly travel blog for Clarendon Press. She's also written a historic cookbook for the Mystery of History and Bright Ideas Press, as well as contributed to the books Wild Things and Castles in the Sky, a guide to choosing the best books for children, and The Lost Tales of Galahad through Rabbit Room Press. What an impressive resume. Welcome, Annie.
Thank you very much. Pleased to be here.
Well, I am so glad to get to have this conversation with you today. I know that we have a lot of similar interests, especially C.S. Lewis and some things in the writing realm. So I'm really excited to hear more from you today. So let's get started by talking a little bit about you. Outside of the classroom, who is Annie Nardone?
Oh, gosh. Well, I was born and raised in Minnesota, but now I live in Florida. Did a sidetrack to Washington, D.C. for a few years, and raised our three kids in Washington, D.C. with all of the benefits of going to all of the museums and Library of Congress. And so homeschooled all three of our kids, K through 12. And one has three of our grandchildren. One's married and three grandchildren, and she lives in Tennessee. One is a graduate student in psychology, and the third one is coming up with a undergrad in apologetics, following in my footsteps, apologetics, and minoring in youth ministry. So we've ended up in Florida, kind of a pre-retirement thing. So the things that we enjoy doing, I keep filling my bookshelves because I keep writing. So I keep buying books. I love reading C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, and I love reading books by the fathers of church history. And medieval poetry, medieval writing is my favorite place to land, and medieval music is my favorite music to listen to while I'm writing. But I love to write, and I had a public school education. It was Minnesota, but my 8th grade teacher told my parents, your daughter should write when she grows up. That was my science fiction writing teacher. He said, your daughter should grow up and write. So that was always in the back of my mind, but I got my undergrad in art, and I've come back to writing since I graduated with my degree with Cultural Apologetics. I like writing, uniting the church with the arts and the humanities. So that's where my heart lies, with books, poetry, all of that.
Fascinating. I'm really fascinated that you homeschooled your children in Washington, D.C. and probably at a time, and I'm kind of making a wild guess here, but at a time when homeschooling probably wasn't quite as popular as it is today. Can you talk a little bit about that decision, given the fact you said you were homeschooled yourself? I'm sorry, you went to public school, but why homeschool your children? What made that shift? And what was it like in Washington, D.C., besides getting to have the whole mall as your classroom? That's to me.
It was great. It was great. Since I started out in public school, homeschool, let's say I started homeschooling our eldest 1996. So it was that time where we were still viewed as we all wore kids and drop waist dresses back in the day.
Yeah.
And I joined a homeschool co-op and taught art at the homeschool co-op. And I just loved it so much. And our eldest was thriving. And then we had our middle child 10 years after that, and our youngest 3 years after that. They're all three radically different learners.
Yep.
The eldest was perfectly suited to doing online learning, which she did for 3 years of her last homeschool adventure. The middle one needed all of the interaction and the friends and the activities and all of that. And the youngest one is kind of in a halfway in between. So we also formed a co-op, a different co-op with about, there was about 100 families in our co-op for the middle two. By this time, the eldest had moved on to college. Middle two participated in our co-op, of which I kept adding classes to teach. So I taught elementary art, elementary science. Then I developed a humanities course where we studied everything. We always did a Shakespeare unit every year. And everything from opera to the post-impressionists, impressionists, Shakespeare, Renaissance, Frank Lloyd Wright. So I would do unit studies. I found that unit studies worked out really well because you could do a deep dive into something and bring in the art, the music, the food, the clothing, the literature, all of that. And that's one of my favorite ways to teach. And that's pretty much how I taught all of our kids. The middle child never did any online. The last one actually did Kepler class, did calculus, a couple classes on Kepler, and enjoyed it. So we've had a broad range, but I was always really flexible with how I wanted to teach our kids. Plus, we did a lot of immersion stuff. So we would hit all the museums and study literature, the arts. We would walk into the art museum, National Gallery of Art, and our kids knew a Picasso from a Matisse to a Rembrandt. And I wanted to make sure that their experience was grounded in all of the humanities, not just writing, not just reading. So that was our focus. We listened to all kinds of music. We did immersion studies. So the kids, our kids, were cooking the foods that we studied from the Renaissance. We made a monastery meal while we were studying Bede. And it worked. I have a wide range of interests, and I tend to want to do them all at once because I get very excited about education. So all that said, by doing that, our kids were able to figure out what they really wanted to do in college. So they could hop between subjects, and I was great with that. And our eldest went on to get a literature, creative writing degree. The middle one wanted to do science, hated the math in science, so she's in psychology and loves that. And the youngest one is in theology. So it was a great experience to dabble in a lot of different things because I really felt that the power of homeschool and the power of having a wide variety of classes like Kepler has, you can pick and choose and follow what you love. Because if you're following what you love, you're going to be really, really grounded in that. And that is where your gift lies. And I believe that every child is made for a purpose.
Yeah.
And that is what their gifts, when they taste a lot of different things, they're going to find what God has gifted them to pursue in their education after high school, in their career. So I encourage that with all of our kids. And I remember our eldest wanted to get a creative writing degree at college. And of course, she got nothing but heat. Why would you get a creative writing degree? You'll never get a job. And she would say to me, well, they're telling me I need to go into business. And I said, do you want to go into business? No. I said, do you want a creative writing degree? Yes, I do. And I said, fine, because that is what God has gifted you as. You are an amazing writer. If he has gifted you in something like this, he has a plan for that gift. So once you graduate, you'll be fine. I have absolute faith that God is taking you in a direction that he needs to take you. And when she graduated, she was the first person with a job. She got a job writing for the college that she graduated from.
Wow. Wow.
So, yeah, I guess that's a testimony to letting your child figure out what their gift is and following that gift.
Well, there's so much to unpack in what you shared there, because the idea of homeschooling really gives that breadth of opportunity, right? And the opportunity to actually evaluate each child in their giftedness and their strengths and weaknesses, and know basically how they're best going to learn, instead of locking them into this lockstep program that they have to dot these I's and cross these T's in order to graduate. So I'm really fascinated by the way that you talk about that, and the way that what you called unit studies, we often call integrated humanities or integrated learning, where we're not just taking these smattering of subjects and trying to figure out what they mean separated from the rest of reality, but really here's what reality really is. So that's I love that, and I'm encouraged by that, and encouraged to hear you say that. So with Kepler, you've talked a little bit about the variety and the options that are available for students. A couple of those options are the creative writing courses that you're teaching. You're teaching creative writing, and I love the subtitle, Your Writing Life, because there's something there that as someone who loves to write myself, there's something about the writing life that is more so than just putting pen to paper as a academic discipline. There's something to the life itself. And then creative writing using interactive fiction. And I don't know if this is the case, but it reminds me of those old stories that we used to read that kind of choose your own ending, right? So there's options. But anyway, I'd love for you to unpack these. Tell me about these courses. Who are they for? What are they about? And, unpack those for us.
Okay. The first class that I'm will be coming up on 4 years with Kepler teaching is the creative writing class, Your Writer's Life. And I've been published, so I know what's involved in polishing your work and sending it out to be accepted in a magazine or a website or whatever. But the way to find where your voice is strongest is by sampling a lot of different kinds of writing projects. And so that's what the class is geared to. I want the students to find what they really love to write. And instead of focusing more on, yes, you're writing a short story, we're going to really hit you hard on the punctuation and the sentence. You can't start with a they, and you can't start. I let them just take pen to paper and draft. And the great thing about how Kepler's classes are set up, which makes my class work so well, is that we zoom in together. So I teach the course inspired by Diana Gleyer's book, Bandersnatch. So my course is an Inklings style course where, much like the Inklings, we bring drafts into each other's hour and we read through them to each other. And then we will say, if you haven't read Diana Gleyer's Bandersnatch book, mine's tattered. I've read it so many times. Students are, almost anybody is really hesitant to critique someone else's work. because you don't want to sound like, oh, this doesn't sound, you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, I guess. I'll just put it that way. But by bandersnatching with each other, we point out what we like, not what we don't like, but what might be improved. Or have you thought about doing it this way? Or I really like what you're doing here. I would like to hear more about this. Or this is a really strong part of your story. Can you expand on this? So it's just like Tolkien, Lewis, and the Inklings, when they would get together in the Eagle and Child with their drafts, and they would share their drafts with each other. That's what we do in the class. And it only takes 1 or 2 classes to let the students warm up to each other, warm up to the idea of, I got to read my stuff in public. But we really do great. And it's so much fun to see how they encourage each other. And their writing really just blossoms after that. And they're not afraid to resonate with each other and say, I don't know, what do you think about this? Is there a better way to say this? Or I kind of got stuck in this part. I don't know what I can say beyond this. So I let the kids take it first. I want to hear what they have to say about each other's writing. And then I will add in, well, maybe this, or maybe that, or maybe you could change this, or perhaps have you thought about using this kind of word or this kind of language? The course for Kepler is ideally suited for that because we're in a Zoom room. So we're basically sitting around a table together, looking at drafts of each other's work. We start out small by writing poetry together, and then we expand out and we write a children's story because many children's stories rhyme. So once they know how to write poetry that rhymes, we write a children's story. And we'll write a Bible study, which my past students have said is kind of a terrifying thing. They think, well, I'm 16, how can I write a Bible study? You can write a Bible study. And after all is said and done, they all say, this has taught me more about Scripture and more about things that I struggle with than anything I've ever written. I also believe strongly that the Christian voice of these young students needs to be present in the culture.
Yes.
And for so long, many churches have pushed away the arts and writing and creative arts. So they've been taken over by secular minds.
Yeah.
And we need to reunite the Christian mind in the church to what's going on in the culture. Mm-hmm. So one of the assignments that we also work on for a few weeks is writing a book or a film review. So they have to choose a book. It can be a secular book. It can be a secular film. And I want you to write a review on that. And I want you to submit it to your church newsletter, a high school newsletter. I had a couple of kids submit to the Kepler newsletter. And that way they're getting their views out there as well. And they engage with the culture. It's not just for us sitting here, us homeschoolers sitting here at our desks, writing things for each other. We want to write for the greater good of the world, to bring in that goodness and truth and beauty and all of these wonderful things that you might miss, but we need to share.
Yeah.
And they wrote so well that it could have been printed in a secular publication without a problem. But they're engaging with the culture. And I think it's really important to do that with your poetry and your books and your short stories and fantasy. I had a couple of students write fantasy short stories that were breathtaking and unnerving, a little bit unnerving, but they kept it within a good boundary. But yet, again, they could submit that to a secular publisher without a problem. So engaging with the common culture is what I want to train them up to do, take their story, their Christian witness, and write what they've learned and take it out. Because it's like reading Narnia. There's a lot of people in the secular culture that have read Narnia, that have read Lord of the Rings. We need to do more of that.
Yeah.
And there's not enough of that. But the time to start writing is when you're in high school. And I want them to start when they're in high school and then keep at it. So
I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, and I am thrilled about the cultural engagement, because that view of keeping the conversation, the Christian conversation, that's probably been one of my pet projects, is the Christian humanism, where, we need to be, as Christians, engaging the human questions of culture. And I think, obviously Christianity has the purchase on culture, and that's part of this whole recovery. So beautifully done. Well, can you talk a little bit about the interactive fiction course? What is this like? And this is a little bit bigger project, as I understand it.
This is a bigger project. It's kind of like right brain meet left brain.
Okay.
I'm working with a NASA engineer who is a programmer, and the interactive fiction idea goes all the way back to online. I mean, follow it back into the 80s. And you're right. It's kind of like finish your own story. They're an online story where you walk into, let's just hypothetically say, you walk into a room. There are 5 objects on the table and you're typing. I walk over the drawbridge into the castle. And then the computer program comes up and says, you see 5 objects on the table. You see a magnifying glass, a book, a burning candle. Think Clue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You pick up one of these objects. And so I, as the interactive gamer, I walk up and I pick up the candle. That picking up the candle releases another command saying the candle is not lit. Do you choose to light it? So every time I say that I'm doing something, the program feeds back to what happened. Basically, it's not really a puzzle, although one part of the game or the story would be a puzzle that you have to figure out. Like, there is a locked door, but you need to get to the other side because there is something in a tree that you need. How are you going to get through the door? So you there's a ton of critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
What the course will be, John, my co-teacher, is writing the programming portion of it. I'm writing the creative story writing portion of it. So he puts in the programming pieces. What happens when I pick up the magnifying glass or the candlestick? I write about what happens as you're going through the story. So I don't write it. The kids write it. So in the beginning of the course, the kids will submit a basic story outline. This is the setting, characters, timeline, era, different basic qualities that they want to use in their story. And then John will help program them. He teaches the programming aspect. I teach them how to write a good story. So we're working together on it. There are several of them. It's like a whole different world. It's kind of neat. I find out that my husband used to play these things when he was growing up. Who knew? So I write the creative story with the kids. Well, they write the story. I just guide them along. So they'll give me the basics of their story, and I maybe make some suggestions. Maybe you need 3 characters. Think about having how these characters are going to be very different from each other. What's the backstory of that character? If I'm playing a story, what do I need to know about that character? Or what will I discover about that character? Meanwhile, that character is walking over the drawbridge. John sets up the programming. So when that character walks over the drawbridge, these are the traps, the puzzles, the keys that character is going to find. So it's if you look up interactive fiction, it will give you kind of a broad idea of what it's all about. But it's neat because, again, we're integrating it into, we should be meeting culture where it's at. And there are students who are programmers. Well, this gives them the opportunity to program something cool and positive, something that they can enter into. At the end of the year, our goal is to have all of the students have a interactive story that they will submit to a international contest that there's money, prizes, things like that. So they will actually take the game that they developed, the story that they developed, and enter it into a contest at the end of the year.
I mean, what you just described, my girls grew up playing Nancy Drew games,
Yeah.
the interactive Nancy Drew games, and they wanted to collect them all, where they did puzzles and went on adventures and solved riddles and read stories, and just the whole thing. And I agree with you. I think this is, if I'm honest, I go back and a while I've been resistant to digital humanities, right? So this is a new aspect of humanities in the academy. But the more that I'm engaging with it, I realize, as Christians, we do need to have a worldview about what culture has developed and what stage of life. Of course, I'd love to go back to the medieval ages and explore there, but this is the world that we live in, and things like AI and things like gaming and the digital world is not going away. It's become a part of our reality that we need to face ethically and know how to engage, as Christians, and not be left out of the conversation. And that has been the tendency of Christians often, is to kind of withdraw from culture instead of engaging it. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. So as we kind of wind down, and I'm really interested to know, is there like a nugget or just some little aspect of the courses you're teaching that, besides what you've shared, that might whet the appetite of students, some little corrective or anecdote or something that you find fascinating yourself that you'd like to share before we go?
Yeah. The students that I've had in the past 3 years all have shared that poetry may have intimidated them. They didn't know how to read poetry, let alone write poetry. And many of them have fallen in love with writing poetry. They have found the missing piece, the creative piece in education that will always be there. You will always have writing. If it's something that you have fallen in love with, you will always have writing. And the world will always need writers, not AI. Because writers they write with a soul. AI doesn't have a soul. AI is a conglomeration of everything that it has ever pulled off the internet and squeezed into a box.
Yeah.
And if you've read poetry written by AI versus poetry written by even a 10th grader who is stumbling to write a sonnet, that rough sonnet has so much more heart and soul. It has a real person behind it.
Yeah.
And I have my opinions about AI, which would be another entire lecture. AI will rise, AI will fall in certain realms. But the need for good writers will always prevail. We will always need someone to write real poetry, a real Bible study, a children's book, or a short story, or a film review. We'll always need that, just like the world will always need an editor.
Yeah.
Because Grammarly doesn't always get it right. So we need to learn how to do that. But I believe that there are so many people out there, so many students who have this creative heart that just needs to be guided and encouraged. And even with the creative writing with interactive fiction course, there's students who love their computers. They love programming, but they're creative. That's the people who design Oregon Trail.
Right, right.
Yep. So we can't get away from programming interactive fiction or games. So why not have an impact on that with a real person, a real mind, a real heart for writing? And so that's what I encourage the kids to do. And I've seen them all just really take hold of their special gift that they have, whatever it is they decide they love to write the most. And I encourage them to take that out into the culture.
That's wonderful. You reminded me of C.S. Lewis's little line or little anecdote in the Teaching or Learning in Wartime, where he talks about it's the human condition to write poetry amidst a battle. It's the human condition to tell jokes when you're up on top of scaffolding, working in dangerous situations. Comb your hair before you go to battle at Thermopylae. Like these are the human things that we do. And so all of the things for which we do everything else is so that we can be these human beings doing these things. And so you're teaching a really human course. Thank you so much, Annie, for taking the time to talk with me today about these things. And for our guests who are tuning in, you can find more about Annie in the description and show notes, as well as a link to all of her courses and how to contact her if you have questions about the courses. Annie, once again, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks, Scott. I really had a good time. I enjoyed talking to you.
Fantastic. Thanks all. God bless.
God bless.